My name is Aria Montgomery, and at 34, my life is a structure I've carefully designed. I'm an architect in Portland, a city of bridges and rain, a place where the scent of damp earth and pine needles feels like home. I find comfort in blueprints, in the clean, certain lines that promise a solid, livable space. For years, I believed my life was just that, a well-built home, its foundations solid, its rooms filled with a quiet, contented love. But foundations can have hidden fractures, and the people you build your life with can be the very ones to bring it down. My younger sister, Serafina, has always been a force of nature, a brilliant, unpredictable storm to my calm, steady earth. Since we were children, scampering through the sprawling oaks of Laurelhurst Park, she has had a unique talent for claiming what was mine. It was never malicious, not in the way a child might snatch a toy. It was more an act of absorption. The collection of smooth, gray stones I'd painted with tiny constellations would mysteriously become the centerpiece of her elaborate fairy garden. The book of poetry I cherished, its pages soft with rereading, would appear on her nightstand, a new bookmark tucked inside. My parents saw it as charm, a testament to her vibrant, magnetic personality. "Look at Serafina, so full of life," my mother would say, her voice warm with admiration, as Serafina pirouetted in a dress she'd borrowed from my closet. My meticulously rendered architectural drawings, which earned me top marks at the University of Oregon, were met with a quiet, "That's lovely, dear. You've always been so focused." My father, a man of few words and deep affections, coached Serafina's soccer team with a fervor he never showed for my academic decathlons. He saw her fire. He saw my quiet diligence as self-sufficiency. It wasn't a lack of love, I told myself, but a different language of it, one I couldn't quite seem to master. And so, I learned to build walls around the things that mattered most, not out of spite, but for preservation. I guarded my heart, my dreams, the delicate blueprints of my own becoming. College was my first true act of independent design. I chose a university on the East Coast, putting a continent between my sister's orbit and my own. In the crisp New England air, away from the familiar shadow she cast, I found my own light. I made friends who were drawn to my quiet nature, who saw strength in my thoughtfulness. I fell in love with the history of structures, with the way buildings hold the stories of the people inside them. And in my final year in the hushed, sun-dusted halls of the university's architecture library, I met Ethan. Ethan Cole was a finance major with the soul of a poet and a smile that could calm the most chaotic storm in my heart. I was struggling with a heavy drafting board when he appeared, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't just offer to help. He spoke to me about the Palladian windows in the library's reading room, about the quiet strength of the old oak tables. He saw the world with an appreciation for its structure, just as I did. Our first conversation lasted until the librarians gently ushered us out into the cool night. That night turned into a week of stolen moments between classes, which bloomed into a love that felt as solid and real as the stone buildings around us. "You see the world in a way no one else does," he told me once, his hand covering mine over a scattered pile of sketches. For the first time, I felt not just loved, but truly, deeply seen. Our life together was a blueprint realized. We moved back to my beloved Portland, our careers taking root and flourishing. He, at a prestigious investment firm, Summit Financial, and I, at Crestline Architecture, a boutique firm known for its sustainable and thoughtful designs. We bought a 1920s craftsman bungalow in the Mount Tabor neighborhood, a house with good bones and a soul that felt like ours. We spent weekends restoring the original woodwork and planting a garden in the backyard, our hands in the same soil. When Ethan proposed 2 years later, on a misty morning at the top of the mountain, the entire city spread below us like a promise. I thought I had finally built my forever home. Then came the wedding plans, and with them, the gravitational pull of Serafina. She was back in Portland, working as a social media manager for a lifestyle brand, a job that seemed to consist of curating a perfect, sun-drenched version of reality. When I called to tell her we were engaged, her joy felt filtered, like a photo with the saturation turned down. "Oh, Ari, that's great. He's doing well at Summit, right?" It wasn't congratulations or I'm so happy for you, but a subtle assessment of his value. Still, my mother insisted. You must ask her to be your maid of honor, Arya. Anything else would be a wound she'd never recover from. I relented, telling myself that this was a chance to build a new kind of structure between us, one based on shared joy. But the old patterns emerged like cracks in fresh plaster. She wore an ivory dress to my bridal shower, and her toast at the rehearsal dinner was a meandering story about her own recent romantic escapades, with a brief, tacked-on mention of Ethan and me at the end. I chose to see it as her own insecurity, a need for the spotlight I could afford to give away on the eve of my happiness. The wedding, held at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, was breathtakingly beautiful. Ethan, seeing my face tighten as Serafina held court with his groomsmen, squeezed my hand. She just wants to shine as brightly as you do tonight, he whispered into my ear. Don't let it touch you. And I didn't. I floated through the day on a cloud of love and hope, believing his love was a shield strong enough to protect me from anything. The first few years of our marriage were a dream. We settled into the comfortable rhythm of our life, our careers advanced, and the quiet, happy hum of our home was my greatest joy. We spoke of children, a conversation that always ended with Ethan's gentle hesitation. Let's just get a little more secure, Ari, he'd say. I want to be able to give them everything. I sensed a deeper anxiety in him, a fear of the immense responsibility he couldn't quite name, but I respected it. I had learned patience. I could wait for the life we were building together. About a year ago, however, the architecture of our marriage began to shift. The silence in our home was no longer companionable, it was heavy with unspoken things. Ethan started working late, his phone, once casually tossed on the kitchen counter, was now always screened down. A wall of passwords and quick-closed laptop screens rose between us. Our intimacy, once a warm, easy fire, dwindled to embers. It's just this new portfolio at work, he'd say, deflecting my gentle inquiries. It's a beast. Once it's settled, I promise, we'll get back to us. But we never did. The distance grew into a chasm. I started noticing small, discordant details. The scent of a perfume on his suit jacket, something floral and bright with notes of freesia and rain, a scent I'd never worn. A stray, shimmering blonde hair on the passenger seat of his car. Serafina's hair was a cascade of honey blonde. I told myself I was letting the ghosts of my childhood insecurities haunt the home I'd built. Serafina was my sister. Ethan was my husband. The very thought was a betrayal I couldn't allow myself to imagine. As my 34th birthday approached, I clung to it as a landmark, a point from which we could navigate back to each other. Ethan, sensing my quiet sadness, promised a special celebration. My parents, in their typical fashion, organized it, a family dinner at the Hearthwood, a restaurant nestled in the West Hills, known for its warm, cedar-and-stone interior and its panoramic views of the city lights. I took my time getting ready that night, a slow, deliberate ritual of hope. I wore a deep forest green dress that Ethan had once told me matched the color of my eyes when I was happy. I was determined to find that happiness again, to reconnect with the man I loved. As I looked at my reflection, a woman poised on the edge of a new year, I whispered a silent prayer. Let tonight be a new beginning. I had no idea it would be an ending. The Hearthwood was a sanctuary of warmth and soft light, the air fragrant with roasted garlic and cedar from the roaring fireplace. It was the kind of place Ethan and I used to love, a testament to thoughtful design and natural beauty. The hostess led me to our table, tucked into a quiet alcove with a view of the city's glittering tapestry. Mr. Cole texted to say he's running a few minutes behind, the hostess said with a kind smile. Your parents are here. My mother's face lit up as I approached, a controlled, polite joy. My father stood to give me a hug, his hand patting my back with a familiar, awkward rhythm. Happy birthday, Ari, he said, handing me a small, tastefully wrapped box. Just a little something from your mother and me. You look lovely, Arya, my mother said, her eyes doing a swift, critical scan. That color is wonderful on you. Perhaps just a touch more blush before we take photos. I absorbed the gentle critique, folding it away into the well-worn drawer where I kept all the others. Thank you for putting this together, Mom. It's perfect. Serafina, true to form, was late. She had a flair for dramatic entrances, for ensuring the energy of a room tilted in her direction the moment she arrived. I glanced at my phone. No message from Ethan. Ethan's caught up at work, I explained, settling into my chair. A last-minute thing. My father nodded. That's the sign of a man on his way up. Your husband is a hard worker. The waiter arrived, and I ordered a glass of sparkling water, wanting to save my first celebratory sip of wine to share with Ethan. My parents exchanged a look. Oh, have a glass of wine, honey, my mother urged. It's your birthday, after all. Before I could answer, a ripple of energy moved through the restaurant. Serafina had arrived. Her laughter, bright and clear, preceded her. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, turning heads as she moved between the tables. And my heart didn't just stop, it felt like it shattered into 1,000 icy shards. Because holding the door for her, his hand resting on the small of her back with an easy, damning familiarity, was Ethan. They moved toward our table with a synchronicity that spoke not of a chance meeting in the parking lot, but of a shared journey. Sorry, everyone. Serafina trilled, leaning down to air-kiss my cheek. Ethan was just pulling in as I was, so we thought we'd save the planet and carpool from the valet. Ethan avoided my gaze, his hand squeezing my shoulder in a gesture that felt less like affection and more like an apology. Happy birthday, Ari. Sorry I'm late. I could smell the fresh scent of his aftershave, stronger than usual, and the faint, treacherous fragrance of freesia and rain. It's fine, I said, my voice a marvel of calm. I'm just glad you're both here. Dinner was a surreal performance. My parents steered the conversation toward safe, shallow waters, their recent trip to the coast, the endless drama of their neighborhood association. Serafina, a masterful storyteller, regaled us with tales of a recent influencer event, name-dropping local celebrities. Ethan was a ghost at the table, a handsome, silent specter who only spoke when spoken to. Seeking some anchor in the swirling vortex of my disbelief, I rested my hand on his knee beneath the table. He flinched, a barely perceptible tremor, before covering my hand with his. His palm was cold and damp. Are you all right? I whispered, while my father was recounting a story about his golf game. Fine, he answered, too quickly. Just tired. After the meal, the gifts were presented. My parents had given me a gift certificate to Powell's Books, a thoughtful but impersonal choice. Ethan's was a small, velvet box containing a pair of sapphire earrings. They were beautiful, but they felt like a stranger's choice, something selected from a catalog of gifts for your wife. Serafina's was a silk scarf in a vibrant shade of coral she knew I would never wear. It will bring out the warmth in your skin, she insisted. Then came the dessert. In place of a cake, I'd requested the restaurant's signature molten chocolate torte. As the waiter placed it before me, a single, elegant candle flickering in its center, my father raised his wine glass. A toast, he began. To our oldest daughter, Aria. You've always been our steady, reliable one. We are so proud of the stable, beautiful life you've built. Stable. Reliable. The words echoed in my head, the language of bridges and buildings, not of a daughter's heart. As I drew a breath to blow out the candle, I saw Serafina shift in her seat, a current of excitement passing between her and Ethan. A cold dread, sharp and certain, coiled in my stomach. Actually, Serafina said, her voice cutting through the moment. Before you make a wish, I have an announcement. And I thought, what better time than a family celebration? Every head turned to her. She stood, her movements slow and deliberate, and rested a hand on her stomach over the crimson silk. I wasn't going to say anything just yet, but since we are all here together. She paused, letting the silence stretch, her eyes finding mine, gleaming with a look of terrifying, unmistakable triumph. I'm pregnant. A beat of stunned silence, then my mother's gasp of pure delight. My father's face broke into a smile wider and more genuine than any I had received all evening. Serafina, that's wonderful, my mother cried. When are you due? How far along? Just about 10 weeks, Serafina said, her hand still protectively on her abdomen. But that's not all. And then, she looked directly at me and delivered the final, fatal blow to the life I knew. Ethan's the father, she announced, her voice a strange cocktail of pride and defiance. We've been in love for months. We're going to be a real family. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded to a distant roar. At our table, it was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound and air away. My father's hand, holding his wine glass, froze midair. My mother's smile collapsed, her expression a kaleidoscope of confusion as she looked from Serafina to Ethan, and then, finally, to me. Ethan just stared at the white linen of the tablecloth as if it held the answers to the universe, his face the color of ash. This isn't how we wanted to tell you, he choked out, his words directed at the table, not at me. The word was a dry whisper from my throat. Serafina reached across the table, placing her hand over Ethan's. We were going to wait until the end of the first trimester. But I just couldn't keep it a secret anymore. Not from my family. Her eyes, glittering with something I could only describe as malicious joy, locked onto mine. We're a family now, Ari. Ethan and I and the baby. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. On my birthday. In this place of quiet beauty. In front of the two people whose approval she had always coveted more than my love. This wasn't a mistake. This was a demolition. My mother found her voice first, a weak, questioning sound. But Ethan is Aria's husband. She said it as if it were a fact they had simply forgotten. Not for much longer, Serafina said with a casual wave of her hand. Let's be honest, their marriage has been in trouble for a long time. Ethan and I didn't plan for this to happen, but when you find a love this real, you can't fight it. A love this real. The words implied that the 7 years I had shared with Ethan, the home we had built, the life we had designed, was a facade, a blueprint for a counterfeit love. Ari, Ethan finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a sickening blend of guilt and, to my horror, relief. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Serafina and I, it just happened. It just happened. The two most cowardly words in the English language. As if their betrayal was an act of nature, a landslide, and not 1,000 tiny, conscious decisions to lie, to deceive, to shatter. When? I asked. My voice was eerily calm, a stranger's voice emerging from my body. When did it just happen? Ethan squirmed. Does it matter? It started around the holidays, Serafina supplied, relishing her role as the narrator of my life's destruction. At your firm's Christmas party. Remember when we both disappeared for a bit? You assumed I was asking him for financial advice. She laughed, a sound like shattering glass. He gave me some advice, all right. 6 months. For 6 months, while I had been trying to shore up the foundations of our marriage, they had been systematically dismantling it, brick by brick. Every late night, every secret phone call, every flimsy excuse now clicked into place, forming a picture of betrayal so vast I couldn't believe I had failed to see it. I think, my father said, his voice low and strained, we need to take this conversation home. But Serafina wasn't done with her performance. There's no need to hide, Dad. We're all family. And soon, she beamed, rubbing her stomach again, there will be one more coal. Your first grandchild. Isn't that wonderful? Predictably, my mother clung to that detail like a life raft in a shipwreck. A grandchild, she breathed, her gaze softening as it always did for Serafina. Well, the circumstances are unorthodox. But a baby is always a blessing. I watched, in a state of clinical detachment, as my mother began to re-narrate this horror into a messy, but ultimately joyful family event. Of course she would. For Serafina, forgiveness was always a given, her most grievous sins alchemized into charming imperfections by the sheer force of our parents' adoration. Ari, Ethan touched my arm, and I flinched as if from a burn. Please, can we just talk about this at home? I looked at his hand, this hand that had held mine as we said our vows, that had traced the lines of my face in the dark, that had, apparently, been holding my sister with the same intimacy. I need some air, I said, my voice flat. I stood, my chair scraping against the stone floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the bubble of silence that surrounded our table. No one moved to stop me. My legs, feeling like they belonged to someone else, carried me toward the restrooms, away from the wreckage. The ladies' room was empty, a cool, marble and mahogany sanctuary. I locked myself in a stall and leaned my forehead against the cold, smooth wood of the door, waiting for the dam to break, for the grief and rage to come pouring out. But they didn't. Instead, a strange and profound calm settled over me, a clarity as sharp and cold as ice. The betrayal was devastating, but it wasn't illogical. It was the final, inevitable result of a lifetime of patterns. Serafina, taking what she wanted. Ethan, avoiding difficult truths. My parents, enabling. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It was the slow, predictable crumbling of a poorly built foundation. I splashed my face with cold water and met my own eyes in the mirror. The woman who stared back was not the same one who had walked into this restaurant an hour ago. There was a new hardness in her eyes, but also a new focus. With hands that were surprisingly steady, I reapplied my lipstick. "You will not fall apart," I whispered to my reflection. "Not for them. Not tonight." When I returned to the table, the scene was one of almost grotesque normalcy. They were discussing baby names. My husband, my sister, and my parents were calmly debating the merits of Aiden versus Finn as if my world hadn't just been detonated. Ethan looked up, a miserable, pleading expression on his face. Serafina watched me, her triumph barely masked by a veneer of concern, waiting for the tears, the accusations, the drama that would solidify her role as the one who had found true love amidst the chaos. I offered her none of it. I slid back into my seat and gave them a small, serene smile. "Well," I said, my voice even. "You've certainly made this a birthday I'll never forget. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to eat my torte before the chocolate sets." Serafina's smile wavered, her script forgotten. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. "Ari," Ethan began, "we need to talk. About arrangements." I held up a hand, a quiet, simple gesture that stopped him cold. "Not now, Ethan. Right now, I am going to enjoy my birthday dessert." I picked up my fork, took a deliberate, mindful bite of the rich, warm torte and closed my eyes, savoring the taste of dark chocolate and bittersweet resolve. When I opened them, all four of them were staring at me as if I had lost my mind. "What?" I asked, my voice laced with a gentle irony. "Were you expecting a scene? Tears? I'm sorry to disappoint you." Serafina found her footing first. We thought you would be more upset." "Oh, I assured her, taking another bite. "I am shattered. But unlike some people, I don't believe my deepest emotions are a spectator sport. Besides," I said, placing my fork delicately on the plate, "there are a few things you all should know before this conversation goes any further." The tremor in my hand was the only sign of the tectonic shift happening within me. I took a slow, calming sip of water. For months, I had been living with a secret, a painful puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. But their announcement was the final, clarifying piece. "I've known about the affair for almost 4 months," I said quietly. Ethan's head snapped up, his face a mask of disbelief. Serafina's triumphant expression dissolved. "What?" he stammered. "You should be more creative with your passwords, Ethan. Our wedding date is a bit on the nose, especially for a man who suddenly starts guarding his laptop like it's a state secret." My mother gasped. "Arya, this is not the time or the place." "Neither is announcing your affair with my husband, Mom," I said, my voice soft but edged with steel. Yet, here we are. I recounted the story of the late night at the office, the borrowed laptop, the email from Serafina with the subject line "Tonight." My world fell apart right there in my cubicle at 2 a.m, I said, my voice never rising. But I didn't shatter. I started making a plan. After I read those emails, I continued, my gaze steady on Ethan. I hired a private investigator. Alder Creek Investigations. They're very discreet, very thorough. They have time-stamped photos of your car parked outside Serafina's apartment on SE Belmont on 17 different nights. They have transcripts of phone calls where you discussed how to tell me. They even have the credit card receipt from the boutique where you bought her that gold locket she's wearing, Serafina. The one you told me was a gift to yourself for landing a new client. Serafina's hand flew to her neck, covering the delicate gold heart. You had us investigated? Ethan's voice was a mixture of outrage and fear. That's a violation of our privacy. I allowed myself a small, sad laugh. That's an interesting perspective, coming from a man who violated the most sacred vow of our marriage. But rest assured, the investigation was perfectly legal. Adultery, as it happens, still has legal ramifications in the state of Oregon. My father looked ill. Arya, please. I'm almost done, I said, cutting him off gently. 3 months ago, I retained Isabel Croft. She's the best family law attorney in Portland. The divorce petition is already drafted, Ethan. I've had our assets appraised, our financial records copied, and my personal inheritance secured in a separate trust. Isabel advised me to wait, to gather all the necessary documentation before I acted. Ethan's face was ashen. Serafina looked back and forth between us, the smug architect of my downfall now realizing she had walked, open-eyed, into a meticulously prepared demolition of her own. You were planning to divorce me? Ethan's voice was a hoarse whisper. Yes, I said simply. I was going to have you served with the papers next week. Your little announcement just moved up the timeline. My mother was crying now. But Ari, a divorce, it's so permanent. Can't you try counseling? Mom, I said, my voice softening with a final, painful patience. Some things cannot be repaired. And that brings me to the final piece of the puzzle. The one piece that makes your announcement so fascinating, Serafina. I reached into my purse and retrieved a single, folded sheet of paper I had carried with me for weeks, a talisman of a painful truth. Ethan had a vasectomy 2 years ago, I said, sliding the medical report from Willamette Valley Medical across the table. We had decided, after much discussion, that children were not in our immediate future. He felt he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Serafina stared at me, then at Ethan, then back at me, her mind refusing to process the information. No, she whispered. That's not true. You're lying. The document is all there, I said. Dr. Bennett. The procedure was 28 months ago. You spent a weekend on the couch with a bag of frozen peas, Ethan. We watched the entire Ken Burns documentary on the national parks. I remember it vividly. Ethan looked as though he was going to be sick. Ari, I was going to tell you. Tell me what? Serafina's voice rose, cracking with hysteria. That you let me believe you could give me a baby? That you let me plan a future? She trailed off, the implication of her own words dawning on her. My mother picked up the paper with trembling hands. Ethan? Is this real? His silence was the only answer she needed. I turned my full attention to my sister, whose carefully constructed world was imploding. So, Serafina, if you are indeed pregnant, then my congratulations are sincere. Just not to Ethan. He is, as the medical records confirm, sterile. So the question is, who is the real father? Or is that a detail you overlooked in your grand plan? The surrounding tables had fallen into a hush. Our quiet corner of the restaurant was now the undeniable center of attention. Serafina looked around wildly, a trapped animal, her moment of triumph now a public spectacle of her own deceit. It's a mistake, she stammered. The records are wrong. They're not wrong, Ethan finally said, his voice a dead monotone. I should have told you, Serafina. I didn't think it would get this serious. We were being careful, or I thought we were. You never thought she would try to trap you with a baby that wasn't yours. I finished for him, a wave of profound pity washing over me for them both. A classic miscalculation, Ethan. You underestimated her. I've had a lifetime of experience. Serafina shot to her feet, knocking her chair backward. I have to go, she gasped and fled, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Ethan hesitated, his gaze torn between her retreating back and my resolute face. Go on, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Go after her. The two of you have created this mess together. You should see it through. He stood, and without another word, followed my sister out of my life. I was alone at the table with my parents. My father stared into his wine glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. Ari, he finally said. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Dad. I picked up my fork and took another bite of the now-cold chocolate torte. It tasted of nothing, but I was determined to finish it. This was my birthday, and I would not be chased from it. Except, perhaps, I added, looking at my mother's tear-streaked face, that Serafina is going to need a very different kind of support from you now. How can you be so calm? My mother whispered, her voice thick with bewildered grief. This is a catastrophe. I set down my fork and looked at her, really looked at her, with the clarity of a lifetime of pain. No, Mom, I said gently. A catastrophe is a sudden, unavoidable disaster. This was a slow, predictable structural failure. Serafina has been chipping away at my life since we were children, and you and Dad handed her the hammer and chisel. The only difference is, this time, I was wearing a hard hat. I motioned for the waiter. The check, please. I believe our celebration is concluded. In the days that followed, I moved through the world in a state of strange, purposeful calm. I checked into a quiet hotel in the Pearl District, a room with clean lines and a view of the Fremont Bridge, its arches a comforting, solid geometry against the gray sky. My phone was a constant barrage of frantic energy, calls and texts from Ethan, from Serafina, from my parents. I silenced it and called Isabel Croft. It's time, I said. File the papers. Her voice was a soothing balm of competence. I'll handle everything, Aria. Just focus on taking care of yourself. Taking care of myself became my new architectural project. While Isabel managed the legal demolition of my marriage, I began the careful work of clearing the debris from my life. Ethan's text swung wildly from desperate apologies, I made the biggest mistake of my life, to self-pitying accusations. Serafina meant nothing, it was just a symptom of our problems. The hollowness of his words only solidified my resolve. 3 days after my birthday, my best friend Lena and I went to the house on Mount Tabor. Ethan was at work. The house, my beautiful craftsman, felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. With a quiet, methodical precision, I packed only what was truly mine, my books, my clothes, the antique drafting table my grandfather had given me, the paintings I'd bought at local art fairs. I left my wedding ring on the polished wood of my nightstand, next to a simple note, Isabel will be in touch. Lena's guest room became my temporary sanctuary. I still can't wrap my head around it, she said, as we hung my clothes in her closet. I mean, siblings fight, but this is biblical. Serafina wasn't trying to fight me, I said, folding a sweater that still smelled faintly of my old home. She was trying to become me. The tragic part is, she destroyed us both in the process. The fallout was messy and loud. Ethan showed up at Lena's building, his desperate pleading turning to angry shouts through the intercom until a neighbor threatened to call the authorities. This isn't fair, Ari, his disembodied voice crackled. You're not even giving me a chance. That night, Serafina called. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual bravado. Ari, can we please talk? I think you've said enough, Serafina, I replied, my voice weary. Please, she whispered, and for the first time, I heard not a performer, but a terrified girl. I need my sister. The audacity of it was breathtaking. You had a sister, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You chose to have an affair with her husband instead. I know, she sobbed. I know it's unforgivable. But I'm so scared, Ari. Ethan won't even speak to me. And I'm pregnant, and I'm all alone. A part of me, the part that remembered a little girl with scraped knees and a fierce need to be loved, ached for her. But empathy could not be a bridge back to the way things were. What did you think would happen, Serafina? I asked. Did you think you would leave me and you would build a perfect life on the ruins of mine? I don't know, she cried. I didn't think. I wanted what you had. The beautiful house, the perfect husband, the stable life. I wanted it to be mine. Well, now it's no one's, I said, the words falling like stones into the silence between us. I truly hope it was worth it. I ended the call and sat in the quiet dark, mourning not just a marriage, but the sister I never really had. My parents, caught in the crossfire, struggled. My mother suggested family therapy, as if this were a simple crack that could be spackled over. She's your sister, Aria, she'd insisted. And she's going to be a single mother. She needs our support. Then you support her, Mom, I'd replied, a new, hard boundary forming in my voice. My support is no longer on the table. My father, to my surprise, called me separately. Your mother doesn't understand, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I do. What they did, there are no words for it. You have every right to walk away, Ari. Just, don't let their poison ruin the good person you are. I'm not planning to, Dad, I said. That's why I'm rebuilding. From the ground up. 2 weeks after that night, I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a converted warehouse in the Alphabet District, a space with high ceilings, exposed brick, and massive windows that flooded the rooms with Portland's soft, gray light. I bought a new sofa in a deep shade of teal, painted the walls a warm, creamy white that Ethan would have called boring, and slowly began to create a space that was unequivocally mine. The divorce proceedings were a distant hum, managed by Isabel's capable hands. Ethan, true to form, initially contested the division of assets, a final, futile attempt to draw me into an emotional battle. It's a classic delay tactic, Isabel advised. He wants to force mediation so he can appeal to your history. We will not give him that stage. I agreed, and eventually, faced with the mountain of evidence, he relented. I poured my fractured energy into my work. I took on the most challenging projects at Crestline, working late into the night, finding solace in the clean, logical world of stress-bearing walls and elegant design solutions. My colleagues gave me a wide, respectful berth, all except for Rowan, a landscape architect we often collaborated with. He started leaving a cup of tea on my desk in the mornings, a quiet offering with no expectation of a response. A month after my birthday, Serafina appeared at my new apartment. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy, her usual polished veneer stripped away. Ethan is seeing someone else, she said, without preamble, when I opened the door. A woman from his office. Can you believe the hypocrisy? I leaned against the doorframe, a wave of profound exhaustion washing over me. Yes, Serafina, I said, my voice gentle. I can. A man who will cheat with you will cheat on you. That's the one structural guarantee in a situation like this. I thought we were different, she whispered, her hands cradling her growing belly. I thought what we had was real. What do you want from me, Serafina? I asked, not unkindly. Her face crumpled. I want my sister, she said, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve you. But I'm so sorry, Ari. And I miss you. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw past the wreckage she had caused to the deeply insecure girl at the core of it all. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said, the words clear and calm. Maybe I never will be. But that doesn't mean I wish you ill. Right now, I need to heal. And I can't do that with you in my life. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. As she walked away, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, somber freedom. For the first time, I had designed a boundary and held it, not for anyone else, but for me. 1 year later, on the morning of my 35th birthday, I stood before the full-length mirror in my sun-drenched apartment. The woman looking back at me was someone I was just getting to know. She was quieter, perhaps, but her eyes held a new kind of light, one that came from within. The past year had been one of slow, intentional reconstruction. The divorce was finalized. Ethan had moved to Seattle, a distant figure in a past I no longer revisited. Serafina had given birth to a beautiful baby boy she named Leo. The other man, a married creative director named David, had, after much drama, left his wife and was now attempting to build a life with Serafina and their son. Their foundation was precarious at best, but it was theirs to build or to break. Our relationship, Serafina's and mine, was a fragile, nascent thing. She had started therapy and, 3 months ago, sent me a long, handwritten letter. It was not full of excuses, but of painful self-awareness. I spent my whole life thinking I was jealous of what you had, she wrote. But I've realized I was jealous of who you were. You never seemed to need the spotlight to know you existed. I'm trying to learn how to do that for Leo's sake. I don't expect your forgiveness, only that you might one day see that I am trying to change. The letter was a door cracked open. Cautiously, I had stepped through. I visited her and met my nephew. Holding that tiny, innocent life, I felt a complex alchemy of emotions, a lingering sadness for all that was broken, and a surprising, tentative hope for what could be regrown. When she asked me to be his godmother, because I want him to have a woman in his life who knows how to build things that last, I heard my own heart, to its great surprise, say yes. My parents and I were also learning a new way of being. In a conversation that felt like lancing a wound, my father finally admitted, "We always thought Serafina needed more because she was so much louder. We saw your quietness as strength, and we took it for granted. We failed you, Ari, and I am so sorry for that." It wasn't a fix, but it was the truth, and the truth is the only ground upon which you can build anything new. My own life was flourishing in unexpected ways. I had been made a junior partner at Crestline, and Rowan, the quiet landscape architect, had become a steady, gentle presence in my life. Our relationship had grown slowly, organically, like one of the native gardens he designed, built on shared conversations, mutual respect, and a deep, unspoken understanding of what it meant to heal. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reverie. It was Rowan, his eyes warm, holding a small, clumsily wrapped gift. "Happy birthday, Arya," he said, his smile reaching all the way to his eyes. "You didn't have to," I said, but my heart felt light. "It's just a little something," he said. Inside was a beautiful, leather-bound journal. On the first page, in his elegant, architectural script, he had written a quote from Rilke: "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." Tears welled in my eyes. "It's perfect," I whispered. That evening, as we walked into a small, bustling restaurant to meet a group of my closest friends, I felt a profound sense of peace. The date that had once marked the demolition of my life was now simply a day to celebrate the woman I had become. My friends greeted me with hugs and genuine, uncomplicated joy. This, I realized, was a chosen family, a structure built not of obligation or history, but of mutual care and respect. As I took my seat at the head of the table, surrounded by laughter and light, I thought about the house on Mount Tabor. I had loved its bones, its history, its solid promise. But a house is not a home if you cannot be yourself within its walls. The betrayal that had shattered my world had, in the end, set me free. It had forced me to tear down a life that was beautiful but flawed, and from the fragments, I was building something smaller, perhaps, but infinitely stronger, more authentic, and entirely my own. The ground was clear. The blueprints were mine. And for the first time, I felt truly, unshakably at home.